All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us and for being so accommodating with the tech delays. They always happen. So we appreciate your patience with us. Tonight, we'll be going over SB1 or Senate Bill 1, what's changed, and how to help in your capacity as individuals with legal experience. And so excited to talk to you all today. And so we'll kick it off with Emily from TCRP.
Thanks, Christina. My name's Emily. I am with TCRP. We are Texas Lawyers for Texas Communities. My favorite thing I've ever heard anybody say about TCRP was Drew Galloway, who was the director of Move Texas at the time, had a group of students out there, and he pointed to TCRP attorneys and he said, "These are the lawyers for the movement." And I loved that. I think of us as in Texas, of course, there are many, many lawyers for the movement, Christina at LDF being among them, but I like to think of TCRP as lawyers for the movement. We were founded in 1990. We are nonpartisan, so even though we will talk about, partisan actors, we help everybody vote. We help everybody in our Beyond Borders program and our criminal injustice program. We don't care what your political beliefs are. We are a 501c3. We have two other programs, as I mentioned. Beyond Borders was formerly our racial and economic justice program. They worked on things like the family separation crisis in 2018. Their ongoing work for migrants and immigrants has been impressive, indispensable, and very, very difficult. I admire them a lot. We also have a criminal injustice team. They work for everybody throughout the entire criminal injustice system that we have in America, from the horrible school to prison pipeline stuff that we can cut off with advocacy all the way up to solitary confinement conditions. They work for folks. And of course, our voting rights program. Our voting rights program does impact litigation, but we also have this election protection program. I know that several of you, Amy Eichel, I can see, and Joanne and Wajiha and Cindy are some of the folks who have helped us out in the past with the election protection program in official or unofficial capacities that, the unofficial ones soon become official through their expertise. But we work to do customer service for voters, and we'll talk to you a little bit about that at the end. Christina, over to you.
Thanks, Emily. I love that. Movement lawyers, very important. Community lawyering and movement lawyering, and building a pipeline for the future of election protection in Texas. So that's really the goal of this presentation and the whole series. But a little bit about myself and my organization. I am a voting rights attorney in our Prepared to Vote and Voting Rights Defender project at LDF, the Legal Defense Fund. You might know us as the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, founded in 1940 by Justice Thurgood Marshall, and really as a law firm for Black people as they navigate America's indignities towards their rights and their livelihoods. So we're involved in every aspect of social justice and civil rights law that impacts marginalized communities. Everything from education equity to fighting against death row cases and death penalty cases to voting rights to police accountability. So that's the larger breadth of LDF's work, but particularly in our voting rights space and our election protection space, we are having aim to have a 365-day approach to election protection, meaning not just during the general election or primaries, but all year round, making sure that communities at the margins are active participants, that we are making sure to build on the nonpartisan election protection coalition that we have in Texas, active in the legislative session and preparing ahead of the legislative session that we're about to enter into, policy reform, public education, and where needed, litigation. And we've been actively participating in the Texas Election Protection Coalition since 2020. We are in some way in litigation and voting rights and redistricting in Texas, it seems like all year round, but we are involved in SB1 litigation as well. And this is just a awesome photo that I love of us and all of my colleagues in my team for the Voting Rights Defender team this year at Selma. So we got to march in Alabama. So picture isn't from Texas, just a picture that I love of our team. And I'm really excited to be doing this work with TCRP. So we will keep it moving along. But today we'll go over an overview and a bill history of Senate Bill 1. So I see a lot of familiar names in the chat. A lot of you are, as Emily mentioned, in your own right, experts in the subject matter. But for those that aren't, we will have time for questions, and we're going to go through a history of how Senate Bill 1 came to be. So let's start with an overview. So here's what we'll be covering today: an overview and bill history, helpful resources, changes in the law, and then, like I said, we'll have time for Q&A. What we will cover: the most important changes in SB1, which honestly are constantly changing. We had an injunction that came down last week. So we are always dealing with changes and ongoing litigation, as I mentioned, with SB1. So that's why it's important to pay attention to any sort of legal updates or news updates that you might see in regards to this bill. The known knowns and then the known unknowns, we'll also cover those. What we won't cover tonight: every single provision in SB1, right? So this is a hundreds of page long bill, and we'll do our best to cover the main points and the top line takeaways. And we've also linked to some really helpful resources by TCRP in which they distill the bill down to, they have versions and resources for plain language, as well as for those of you that have robust legal experience. We won't cover every change to election laws enacted in 2021. There were a lot of changes, not just SB1, but other bills as well. And then we won't cover the unknown unknowns either. All right, so SB1, the zombie bill. So for many of you, you might know this already, but SB1 passed both houses of the Texas legislature on August 31st, 2021, signed into law by the governor on September 7th of 2021, with an effective date of December 2nd, 2021. So the March primary was the first statewide election in which we dealt with a post SB1 world and saw the direct impacts on voters after, a lot of us as advocates on the ground or in the courts and in the community work to fight this bill zealously. So I know that a lot of you might be involved in your communities or with your various organizations or in your capacities. And we put up a really strong fight to fight this bill, both in the courts as well as in the legislature. And now we are really turning to our next bastion of fighting this bill, which is going to be election protection, as well as organizing in our communities and educating our neighbors. But like I said, advocates fought it to the end of the regular session and through 2 special sessions. So this was not, a short battle. This was a fraught battle that got national attention. There were Democratic walkouts in late May and mid-July to buy some time. But SB1 passed at the end of the second special session in early September. And so that's what we're working with now. And I really want to mention the work done by advocates and organizers, because we did our best, and there was a lot that got thrown out that could have been much worse. So that work was not done in vain. Now let's talk about some of the helpful resources that if you want to dig into more after tonight's CLE, there's more resources. If you're a nerd like me, you always want to read and find out more. So why not? We'll provide those for you as well. Like I said, the good people at TCRP have provided you with amazing links here, but there should be SB1 summaries, an extended version, as well as a shorter version of the summary if you want to share it with a friend or a family member that maybe doesn't have robust legal experience. I've used these before to share with various groups. And then also a presentation on the 2021 changes to the voter registration laws. And then remember, a through line throughout this presentation and throughout all of these CLEs is going to be about the hotline. Be sure to call the 866-R-VOTE hotline, whether when you encounter issues or when you sign up to be a poll monitor or a legal monitor. You're going to be calling in this hotline to elevate any issues that people might encounter. So let's keep going, but make sure you check out these links and these extensive summaries. Changes in the law. So that's why we're here tonight, to talk about what changed. We're going to go over the specific changes in the law, and it is going to get into some legalese. But remember, I'll answer your questions to the best of my ability at the end of the presentation, because we have gone through a lot of back and forth with this bill, as we've said. So there's a lot to navigate here, and we're still dealing with various court proceedings regarding this bill. Okay, so pre-filling your voter registration forms. The changes to voter registration forms have been extensive. In the past, organizations could make things easier by pre-filling registration forms. And now SB1 puts new restrictions on that. As you can imagine, this was widely used by a lot of nonpartisan groups, partisan groups. You could see it being utilized for new voters, new Americans, new 18-year-olds. And now SB1 has prohibited pre-filling certain fields on the voter registration form. Voter registration orgs that you are probably familiar with in your community, whether they be good government groups or civic engagement groups, can no longer pre-fill whether or not individual applicants are US citizens, whether the applicant is a county resident, whether the applicant is incapacitated, meaning they aren't fully capable or have some type of incapacitation at that time, right? That could be a variety of situations. That form still can't be pre-filled for that individual. It can't be pre-filled if despite a voter's felony conviction status. Voters' Texas driver's license, IDs, social security number fields, or statement of lack of such numbers also cannot be pre-filled. As you can imagine, if you're familiar with these forms, and if you're a Texas voter, you know that they're very convoluted and complicated for any individual. Looking at the form itself, right? There's a lot of small font. There's a lot to look through, and it can be an accessibility issue as well. But no longer allowed to pre-fill forms. That should be the takeaway that you get from this immediate change. Updating voter registration forms electronically. Registered voters can now update their registration online when they move from one county in Texas to another. This is a rare but good change that we see from SB1. You might see in the news media sometimes some folks saying that there are good things from SB1. Largely, it is a extreme voter suppression bill, but we see some minute changes that are good. You still can't fill out a brand new registration online, but again, this only applies to Texans moving from one county to another, and this only applies to currently registered voters, not new registrants. You can update your registration online when you move from, for example, Bexar County to Harris County. Drive-through voting. A lot of you, if you're not from Harris County, you might not be familiar with this. Well, drive-through voting was an innovation that Harris County pioneered in 2020, and it was really widely successful, as you can imagine, especially in the height of a global pandemic. Under SB1, it is now illegal. So this was really a common sense change and voting measure that anyone could imagine is just good for voters. Doesn't matter your background or your political affiliation. Why not drive-through vote, just like you can drive through at a Starbucks or a fast food restaurant? Unfortunately, no more drive-through voting. There's a prohibition on casting a vote inside a motor vehicle unless you're a curbside voter. If you're not sure what a curbside voter is, don't worry, we'll get to that later. Polling places must be inside of a building, and they can't be in a movable structure. So that is something to note, right? They can't be in like an RV or like a satellite office that would be movable on wheels. So just remember that, but this mostly doesn't affect you unless you were a Harris County voter, which you might be, but no more drive-through voting. But yes, there is curbside voting still with some changes. So on that note, let's talk about curbside voting. Curbside voting, now you probably are familiar with curbside voting. It is the law in Texas. It's not optional, right? So if you're physically unable to enter the polling place without personal assistance or the likelihood of injuring your health, then curbside voting is available. And it's required by Texas law and the election law to be at every single polling place for people with disabilities. So again, if you're unable to vote without personal assistance or have likelihood of injuring your health, curbside voting is still the law, but you have to fill out a new form if you're providing transportation to the polling place to 7 or more curbside voters. So that is, it does get a little tricky here, right? But the important number to remember is 7 or more, and that is simultaneously. So I always like to do a hypo. If Emily was giving myself a ride as well as 4 others, right? So we're at 5, 6, we're at 6 people simultaneously, we don't need to fill out that form. If you're just driving a friend or you're driving your grandma, she doesn't feel comfortable going alone, and she again falls into that category of someone who can access curbside voting, you don't need to fill out the form simultaneously. You could also drive 7 individuals throughout the day, 7 different times. Again, it's 7 or more simultaneously. You probably need a big car to do that as well. The curbside voting form does have some changes in terms of what you're going to fill out. You're going to fill out now, well, this is a new form, but you're going to fill out the transporter's name and address, whether the transporter is only providing transportation or also providing any type of assistance to the voter. Remember, you still have federal protections of getting assistance when needed, and you can choose the assister of your choice pursuant to federal law. We'll talk about the changes under SB1 later on, but you do have to make clear whether or not you're just driving grandma and she's voting curbside, or whether or not you're also providing assistance. And a big emphasis here on the familial exception. This does not apply if you're related to each of the voters. If you have a big family and you're driving, grandma, your mom and dad, 4 siblings, that's 7 people, it doesn't apply. You don't need to fill out the form. So there is a familial exception, which is good to know because we might have large families. Important, right? SB1, as I've clarified, does not prohibit driving people from driving voters to the polls. Keep doing that. You can both drive an individual to vote curbside. You can drive 5 people to vote curbside without filling out a form. You can also just give people to the rides, give people rides to the polls, which I know a lot of organizations do across Texas. So feel free to still do that for your friends, your neighbors, your college classmates. There's no prohibition on driving people to go vote. If you need a carpool, do that. Better for the environment anyway. So proactive vote by mail applications. So sending out vote by mail applications proactively is also something that Harris County did in 2020. It is now illegal. As you can imagine, another common sense measure that's pro-voter that we definitely support at the Texas Election Protection Coalition. But important to note that your public officials / elections officials can no longer solicit a vote by mail application from a person who didn't request an application. So, you can't be proactive in that effort. You can't distribute a vote by mail application to a person who didn't request the application. Basically, just have to wait until they come in and request that application themselves. We'll talk about what public officials can do next, but here we're covering what you can't do. Public officials, meaning your elections official, your elections administrator employees that work at your local voter registration office, they cannot authorize or approve the expenditure of public funds to facilitate third-party distribution of a vote by mail application to a person who didn't request one. Long sentence, but basically it means that your elections workers, administrator can't approve any sort of taxpayer-funded public funds to facilitate third-party an event or distribution of vote by mail applications encouraging people to vote by mail unless they proactively come in as the voter and request it. Elections officials cannot complete any portion of a vote by mail application and again distribute that application to an applicant. So these are all important changes to keep in mind. But what can a public official or election official do? An election official can still, provide access to an application on their public website. Each of your county websites, whatever county you're from, we have 254 in Texas, has a public website. I encourage you all to review that website to look at key dates about, when early voting starts. We have 2 weeks of early voting to look at when your vote by mail application is due, when you have to submit that application, and then when you obviously have to get that ballot in, as well as changes to the law. Elections officials can still direct you to that public website. They can still help complete portions of a vote by mail application for a voter if they are lawfully assisting the voter, right? They can still provide general information about vote by mail, the vote by mail process, or vote by mail timelines. Again, reiterating that information that's publicly available. And if you have questions, you can always, of course, call your elections administrator office and they can provide that general information. I encourage all of you to do that and call your elections administrator's office and get to know them and be active in that space. Public officials can also engage in the prohibited conduct from the last slide, while acting in the official's capacity as a candidate for public elective office. So in a lot of these roles, elections administrators are elected or appointed, right? So there's different roles that are served. So you might have somebody in their official capacity as a candidate for a certain office, and they then can, distribute some of those vote by mail applications or do some of that activity that we talked about that's prohibited in their government role as an employee. All right, so changes to providing assistance. SB1 would not allow voter assistance, so more so than anything other than reading the ballot and marking the ballot. A federal judge, as I mentioned last week, struck down those provisions and had them moved from the new assistance oath. The court noted that federal law protects assistance, as I mentioned, that helps meaningfully and effectively voters meaningfully and effectively exercise their right to vote. Last week, Texas officials declined to appeal this ruling, woohoo, which likely means that these provisions of SB1 are permanently enjoined and cannot be enforced. So we're going to, not go over this slide. As you can see, this is a win for us. But like I said, the landscape is constantly changing. But for now, we're hoping that, again, that we can revert back to the federal law that protects assistance and allows voters to choose who assists them. Of course, with the caveat that it can't be your employer or union representative, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So changes to providing assistance. This oath, minus the provision that we talked about in the previous slide, is still in effect. So an assistant must also swear to new things under penalty of perjury, right? So you're going to be signing a form, attesting to it under penalty of perjury, that the voter represented to me that they're eligible to receive assistance, that you as the assistant didn't pressure or coerce the voter into choosing me to provide assistance, which is good, right? Because we want to make sure that your assistants are doing just that, providing assistance, but not intimidating or coercing a voter. The assistant will not communicate information about how the voter has voted to another person. And the assistant understands that if assistance is provided to a voter who is not eligible for assistance, the voter's ballot may not be counted. So these are still in effect and are some, basic rules that you should take away from this presentation about voter assistance. So DPS, Department of Public Safety, voter registration checks, requires monthly DPS voter roll comparisons to verify citizenship status. So some of you may remember the failed voter purge that then Texas Secretary of State David Whitley tried to implement. I know there was some ongoing litigation about it. Texas group sued on that purge, and Whitley ultimately lost his job. SB1 codifies the settlement from that lawsuit. And so, there are going to be monthly checks to make sure that individuals that have their IDs and are getting driver's licenses are verified with their citizenship status. Voters flagged by DPS database as non-citizens then have to submit that additional proof of citizenship, but only if the record from DPS is dated after the person's voter registration becomes effective. So timeliness is really important here, so keep that in mind. And proof of citizenship can be a voter's birth certificate, U.S. passport, certificate of naturalization, or any other form prescribed by the Secretary of State. Important to remember, and also feel free to do some research after about that litigation and what was going on with that voter purge in Texas. I know we're dealing with similar issues now in Mississippi as well. So early voting hours. There are going to be changes from SB1 that can be confusing. This graph really does a good job of breaking it down, but in a nutshell, what you should take away is that voting in Texas can no longer take place before 6 a.m. or after 10 p.m. So there's different limits on hours for several types of elections and different limits for different sizes of the county as well. Like I said, 254 counties in Texas. I know in the March primary, we dealt with a whole range of early voting hours across all of our counties. But it functions as a prohibition on 24-hour voting. But know that, again, check that county website and be sure you know when your early voting is happening in your county. It is going to be for 2 weeks ahead of Election Day, but the hours are going to be different from county to county, even if you're neighboring counties. And again, it can't take place before 6 a.m. or after 10 p.m. All right. Cool. Sorry, I was just checking the chat. Emily mentioned that she'll distribute the tiny URLs at the end, and they're going to be in the presentation again towards the end. So feel free to look out for those. And those are really great resources that you should all review. I know I review them regularly. So important, proponents of SB1 claim, so again, anti-voter advocates that push for SB1 claim that it doesn't limit early voting hours, it extends them. Nope, point blank, that's not the truth. SB1 limits the possibility of early voting to the hours of 6 to 10 p.m., bans 24-hour voting, counties still control voting within that time frame. Oftentimes I see early voting hours are 8 to 5 sometimes, or like 10 to 4 in some counties during early voting during weekends. And as you can imagine, 8 to 5 on a weekday isn't really helpful for many of us that work non-traditional jobs or work nights, different things like that. We want to make sure that we have as accessible hours as possible. All right, I'm just going to get a sip of water. Give me 1 second. Emily, I'm going to take a break for some water. Do you want to cover the next few slides for vote by mail ID numbers, if you don't mind?
Not at all.
Great.
Great. So the vote by mail ID numbers, of course, y'all have heard about this if you've been plugged into voting rights news in Texas in the last 6 months. This has been the thing that we've seen the most, I would say, the biggest impact of SB1 so far on this. But there are 3 parts to the new vote by mail ID rules. Number 1, voters must provide certain ID numbers on the vote by mail app and return the carrier envelope. Number 2, the vote by mail app is rejected if the numbers don't quote unquote identify the voter. And number 3, the cure process is different for vote by mail applications and return envelopes. This is all going to get pretty technical, so please bear with me if it gets too technical, and feel free to ask questions via the question tool. Sorry, I'm just pulling up my notes right here. All right, so you must include the following on your vote by mail application or return carrier envelope. Either Texas driver's license number, a Texas election ID certificate number. Those are very rare. You probably don't have one. I don't know that I've ever encountered somebody who had a Texas election ID certificate, or Texas personal ID card, often used for minors or people who don't drive. And so you can use an expired card, any of these, if it is quote unquote otherwise valid. Any of that works for this number for these purposes. If you don't have one of those, then you give the last 4 digits of your social security number. And if you have none of these, no ID, driver's license, election ID, or Texas personal ID card, and you don't have a social security number, you can check a statement that says you have neither of those. The problem has come from what I understand. The problem has come from folks who registered with their driver's license number and then put their social security number. The database, or those ballots are being rejected, even if both of those numbers are correct for that person. So, you know, I think some folks have been saying don't vote by mail because of this. You know, that's totally valid for some people. What I would say, what we at TCRP and I think Christina at LDF would say is, you can and should put both your ID number and your social security number to minimize the risk of rejection. Unless you remember for sure that you registered to vote providing only your social security number. But even then, I think it's for the best to just go ahead and put both of those numbers on your vote by mail application.
Agreed.
Thank you. I love to get endorsed by people who are very intelligent like Christina. So I'm always fishing for that, if you can believe it. All right. The vote by mail application form looks like this. This is, you can see off to the right, the numbers there. And next slide. Oops. Oh, sorry. And the return carrier envelope looks like this. Oh, sorry. My dog is very upset about these new vote by mail rules. She's a great ally. But yes, so that's what your return carrier envelope will look like. The vote by mail will, or the ballot by mail will be rejected if the number provided doesn't identify the same voter identified on the applicant's application for voter registration. That's the terrible language. The number given must match whichever number is in the individual's official voter file when they registered. What number did they give? The vote by mail will be rejected if those fields are left blank, and those fields are relatively new. So that is something that has come up. The vote by mail will be rejected if an old version of the form is used and no ID number is provided. So if you have an old vote by mail application lying around, that will also be to your detriment.
Thanks, Emily. I can jump back in now. I'm done being parched. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina.
All right. So again, a lot to remember, a lot to cover. So be sure to review those vote by mail applications thoroughly and always tell your friends and neighbors to do the same. There's a lot of changes and a lot of ways that your ballot can be rejected, which of course is kind of the intent of SB1, and we vehemently disagree with that. So let's talk about the impact. A lot of Texans had their ballots rejected in March, higher numbers than ever before. And let's talk about the numbers. The rejection rate in the state's most populous counties was roughly 15%. It's really, really drastic. You guys should not take that number lightly. By comparison, during the 2020 general election, nearly 1 million absentee ballots were cast statewide and just under 9,000 were thrown out. So a rejection rate of roughly 1%. So that is, you know, a astronomical rise in rejections for vote by mail ballots. This article highlights that more than 24,000 Texas voters had their ballots rejected in the March primary. And it's really stark, the impact on our communities of color and specifically Black and Hispanic voters. In a review of election data done by the New York Times that we recently pulled, a surge in the ballot rejections disproportionately affected Black people in the state's largest county and revealed that in Harris County, which obviously includes Houston, areas with the largest Black populations were 44% more likely to have ballots rejected than heavily white areas. And the analysis also found that Black residents made up the largest racial group in 6 of the 9 zip codes with the most ballot rejections in the county. So the largest county in the state, from my recollection, the largest county and elections administration operation in the country, you know, over 700 poll sites. And we're seeing massive numbers of rejections for mostly Black voters. And so this is definitely a racial justice issue and a voter disenfranchisement issue that you all should keep top of mind when you think of SB1. Let's talk about the curing process and for vote by mail applications. It's going to get a little bit wonky in the legalese again, but try and keep following along. And again, we can answer questions at the end. So how does a voter fix a rejected ballot? There is a curing process. Cure meaning fixing or remedying in this sense, right? The curing process also changed under SB1. So the county must, not may, must provide notice of the ballot rejection. This is going to be something that has to happen, if possible, within 2 days, right, of that noticing that error. So when a vote by mail carrier envelope has a signature issue, if maybe it's missing a required statement of residence, it has an incomplete or inaccurate ID number, like Emily mentioned ahead in the previous slide. Under the new ID matching requirement, it has to have that same matching ID associated with the voter file, or maybe it has incomplete information. The early voting ballot board and the verification committee must, within 2 business days, return the envelope to the voter by mail in order for them to make that change. Notice must include info about the ability to correct and add a number on the online vote by mail tracker. So there is a tracker. Unfortunately, it was really poorly utilized this past cycle and oftentimes was not functioning properly because, again, technology fails, but there is a tracker, so keep that in mind. If a voter uploads a number that identifies them, then the county must provide the voter with a vote by mail ballot. The curing process for vote by mail ballots is going to be wrapped into the general process for curing the ballots as well. And another thing to note is that if the early voting ballot board or the signature verification committee determines that it's not possible to send the ballot back in time for the voter to correct or return it, then they may, but they're not required to, notify the voter about the defect by telephone or email. And I know that some counties were trying to do this as well during March, and you should know that a good faith effort would definitely include a phone or email notification as well, but it's not required. Securing a rejected mail ballot, the new process to notify voters of certain problems with their mail ballot and fixing it. So like I said, there's a new process, so keep that top of mind as well. The securing process is triggered by the following problems. Like I said before, maybe there's a signature issue, failure to sign or match the signature, missing a required statement of residence, incomplete or inaccurate ID numbers. We see this probably most of the time. Incomplete information regarding a witness to the vote by mail ballot. So again, it is complicated, and a lot of us registered to vote years ago. I know I registered to vote over a decade ago. How would I know what number I put on that registration application? So it's very complicated and creates a lot of hurdles for everyday voters. So keep that in mind. And we definitely get a lot of questions about the vote by mail ballot process. And now we should know and have mastery of how to cure those ballots. And again, the curing process is different depending on when the problem is discovered, like I mentioned. So we'll use the SVC here to mean a signature verification committee, and EVBB to mean early voting ballot board, like I mentioned. All mail-in ballots are reviewed by either that signature verification committee or early voting ballot board. So the signature verification committee or the EVBB, early voting ballot board, decide, would it be possible for the voter to correct the error and return the envelope before the polls close on election day? If yes, then the board must return the carrier envelope to the voter by mail, that 2-day period that we talked about. If the issue results from the ID number, the voter may enter the correct number on the vote by mail tracker online, but still must return their ballot to the county by 7 p.m. on election day. Polls close at 7 p.m., got to get that ballot in at 7 p.m. If no, then the SVC and EVBB may, not must, but may, notify the voter of the defect by telephone or email. I got ahead of myself because I like to emphasize that point. And again, well-intentioned elections workers and elections administrators do take advantage of this and do notify folks by telephone or email. And they also tell the voter that they may either request their vote by mail application to be canceled or to come to the clerk's office in person within 6 days, which is the traditional period of curing your ballot, to correct the defect. You have 6 days after election day. A voter can also enter the correct ID number on the vote by mail tracker in lieu of these options. And so as you can see, these bodies have a lot of discretion, and it differs from county to county, individual to individual serving on the SVC and EVBB. So there's a lot at play here. Vote by mail assistance. All right, folks, thanks for paying attention. We're almost there. We have like 5 or 6 slides left, so we're chugging along. So vote by mail assistance. We don't have time to have a deep dive into these tonight because we are coming up on time in about 15 minutes. But if you visit these resources that we mentioned, and then we'll link again, you can see the changes there. We'll bring those links up for you at the end, like Emily said. There's 3 categories of changes that you need to remember. There are more requirements on the assistance form. It's easier to prosecute people living in the mail-in voter's dwelling. And there's a tighter ban on compensation for depositing/assisting a vote by mail ballot. So there's going to be more penalties involved and more requirements on the assistance in general. Poll watchers, very important because we're going to be doing a robust training on poll monitors, and we've mentioned poll workers in the past. Let's talk about poll watchers. Poll watchers are very different. They are usually associated with a partisan campaign or candidates committee. And poll watchers need to now complete an online training program developed by the Secretary of State. It is free. I've seen the training. It's pretty basic. It's like an hour. The training is available on demand. It must be on demand on the internet. The poll watcher has to present this training certificate when reporting for service as a poll watcher. Again, a partisan poll watcher serving on behalf of a candidate or candidates committee, not a nonpartisan poll monitor, which several of you probably participate as, or if not, might participate with us as a nonpartisan poll monitor. A poll watcher must also take a new oath at the beginning of their service, where they swear or affirm that they won't disrupt the voting process or harass voters in the discharge of their duties. So this is big, right? A huge part of SB1 was its new protections for partisan poll watchers. So they're appointed to stand inside the polling place. They observe the electoral process, and they oftentimes get a head start on the turnout rates. They can get a slip at the end of the election about how folks voted and maybe how their candidate's doing. It's important here that that poll watchers, again, can be inside. Poll monitors are going to be outside of that 100-foot distance, and they're nonpartisan. And there's a lot that happens in terms of the poll watcher and possible removal and their behaviors. And it's a concern for us as voting rights advocates, because poll watchers can't be removed for violating the election code or any other provision of law relating to the conduct of elections, unless an election judge or clerk observed, like they have to physically observe this violation, which, as you can imagine, it's really hard. Election judges and clerks are very busy on election day. They're running around, and we want to make sure that they are focused on the administration of our elections and not always concerned about poll watchers. A presiding judge can call law enforcement to remove a watcher if they commit a breach of the peace or a violation of the law. What does that mean? That means they still have to abide by regular civil and criminal law. They can't go in there and assault or commit assault or battery of voters or poll workers. But this doesn't apply to violations of the penal code, right? So they're still abiding by certain provisions of the civil law, but doesn't apply to violations of the penal code. And it's important to note that having law enforcement called to or to present at a polling location is in itself, again, both disruptive to the voting process, can delay voting, can intimidate some voters because the police have a sordid history with voters in this country. And while sometimes it may be necessary, it's always an escalation of the situation. So really concerning about the expanded powers of poll watchers and the proximity of which they can watch voters, and the fact that an election judge or clerk would have to observe their behavior of violating the code in order to actually remove them. Poll watchers and the right of observation. I touched on this a little bit, but there's newly expanded criminal offense. Any action to obstruct the view of a watcher, right? Not a voter, but a watcher, or the distance the watcher can actively watch, or the procedure to be observed in a manner that would make observation not reasonably effective. So this law, SB1, has created protections for poll watchers at what I believe and what we believe is at the expense of voters, right? So poll watchers are able to, there's expanded criminal offenses for our elections workers if they get in the way of a poll watcher or disrupt the manner of them from being reasonably effective. Watchers can be near enough to see and hear, right, the activity that they're trying to observe. That's really close to voters. They have to be able to hear and may not be denied free movement where election activity is occurring, except for being prohibited from being present at the voting station where a voter is preparing their ballot or preparing to be assisted. It's really concerning because at times we've seen that possibly a poll watcher could be representing or misinterpreting assistance as unlawful assistance, right? So when they're so close to be able to be near enough to see and hear, you get into a murky area of them being in the way of lawful assistance as well. So some final notes on the right of observation here. The watcher can observe all election activities relating to the closing of the polling place. Like I said, they basically can be there until voting stops. The watcher can observe the sealing and transfer of a memory card, a flash drive, hard drive, data storage device, or other medium now existing or later developed and used by the voting system equipment. They can get those first numbers from the polling places to see how the turnout was. And a watcher can also follow the transfer of election materials from the polling place to a regional tabulating center, the central count station, which often happens hours after the polling place is closed, and any other location designated to process election materials. These are not powers that, again, poll monitors, nonpartisan poll monitors have. So keep that distinction in your mind because those roles are very different. Poll worker, poll watcher, poll monitor, and that's going to be a through line throughout the future of these the series, as well as if you do trainings with us for being a nonpartisan poll monitor. All right, so here are these helpful links again that we have for you. Be sure to check them out. Emily's also going to drop them in the chat. And if you, have no fear, if you have a question, always call 866-OUR-VOTE, and we'll be there on election day as, as needed to be dealing with legal rapid response, any type of comms rapid response, any type of issues on the ground. Lawyers from TCRP, LDF, and our allied organizations, ACLU, and a range of other organizations will be there to answer questions and deal with issues in real time. But what can you do to help, right? Came to this presentation, what's next? You can sign up to be an election protection legal volunteer at this link right here, txcivilrights.org/22EP legal. Very important. This is an all hands on deck effort. We need you now. It's pretty scary out there. We're dealing with election sabotage attempts right and left. We're dealing with voter suppression, as you can see, through SB1. And we're dealing with expanded powers for partisan poll watchers and the deputizing of everyday individuals to commit quote unquote election integrity efforts. So we need you out there as a nonpartisan legal volunteer to help us escalate issues, identify any sort of voter suppression efforts, and to escalate those issues to us on election day. And so what does a legal volunteer do? You'll provide that customer service for Texas voters to navigate our draconian laws. You don't have to be an expert in everything Texas election law. I certainly am not, but it's a learning process. And we have attorneys and advocates with decades of experience to be in the leadership and be in the command center. So you'll be that first line of service for our voters. You'll be solving complex issues to help voters exercise their rights. You'll operate the command centers with us all across Texas during early voting and on election day. We have different command centers and regional hubs across the state, and we are expecting thousands of issues to come in. So we need an army of legal volunteers to help us go through these issues and help to address them timely, whether that be filing cases or filing for litigation if needed, or filing to expand voting hours due to late openings of polling places. All of this takes time and effort, and we need all hands on deck. But thank you again for joining us. We have time for questions. That's what we have for you tonight. Here is the CLE credit. The course number is going to be 174166056. Or you can scan this helpful QR code. But here's the CLE credit that you were promised. And thank you so much for joining us. Again, there's information here about next week where we'll discuss issues facing college voters. If you have questions, happy to answer those with Emily. Emily, did I miss anything?
No, you did great. And there were a couple of times where you got something that I wish I would have thought or said. So you negative missed things. The opposite of missing things. I did want to uplift a question from Joanne. Christina, I wanted your second opinion on it. Joanne asked, can an election judge remove a poll watcher, or can only a police officer remove a poll watcher? I believe the way SB1 is written, only a police officer, a law enforcement officer, can remove a poll watcher. Christina, is that your understanding as well?
That was my understanding as well. Yes. Once the behavior is observed by the election judge, then a law enforcement officer could physically remove them.
Yeah. And of course, you have to wait for them to call the law enforcement officer and come in. All of that.
Right.
And
all of that takes precious time.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of opinions in the voting rights community, but my opinion is I prefer fewer law enforcement officers at polling places because I think it is intimidating to some folks. Any other questions we didn't get to in the chat?
I've dropped the CLE course number again in the chat. Please sign this code, get that credit, and sign up to be a monitor with us, a legal volunteer with us, please. We really need you.
After this presentation, you already understand so much of the law, so you might as well just go the extra mile and come volunteer with us.
Right. questions? I'm going to check the Q&A.
Oh, yeah. Voter registration, Leola is asking, can someone working on a campaign block walkers, for example, register voters while they're campaigning? That's a good question, Leola. I don't know for sure. Christina, what's your thought?
Oh, okay. Can someone working on a campaign, block workers, for example, register voters while they're campaigning? You know, I think this is I want to think about this because I know that there was, I believe yes, but also it differs when you're a sitting elected official sending out emails if you're running for office again. So that is going to be a little bit of a murky answer from me, but I can look into that. I want to definitely look into that and get back to you.
Definitely can't pick up mail-in ballots, but I
Yeah.
believe it should be okay. But don't rely on that in court.
Yeah.
Someone asked, is it better to be a poll worker? I think it is equal great to be a poll worker, and you can do both. Both volunteer with us and work the polls. Joanne is asking, under emergencies in the past, hours were extended, but folks had to provide provisional ballots only until a judge ruled. Can this still happen? I believe so, Joanne. I don't think anything has changed with that.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, nothing's changed on that. And you could be a poll worker during early voting and volunteer with us on election day, or you could do, like Emily said, you could do both. It's all very important.
Yes. Great. Well, thank y'all so much. Thanks for bearing with the technical difficulties, and extreme thanks to Christina, who did the whole presentation herself like a champion, and did it better than I definitely could have. Oh, Beth and Cindy are both saying that campaigners can register voters and parties can send out voter registration cards, and a block walker can register voters. And I very much trust Cindy.
Amazing.
I ask her all, life advice and voting advice. I would always trust Cindy.
Amazing. Yes, definitely. I second that. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Beth. Deputy voter registrar is Beth. Beth, thank you. 99% sure a block walker could. Yep. Another important role, a deputy voter registrar. Thank you for that. And thank you, Emily, for helping us with the tech and helping us get CLE credit this evening. Again, our websites, if you need to contact us, but get that CLE credit, and be sure to sign up to be a legal monitor. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Stay safe.